Now, if there's anything that shows that women have simple desires and simple pleasures, it's this. The idea that you would betray... Actually, no. The idea that you would choose to support and be loyal to an entity, all in exchange for fine dining and Louis Vuitton bags, like, that seems like a very simple thing to do. Like, this is the purest example of simple pleasures.
The royal penis is clean, Your Highness.
Welcome to the Breakdown Podcast, where I talk about love, sex, and relationships from a guy's perspective, as well as a bunch of other guy shit. The man on the mic is a man who believes that running your mouth should be a form of cardio. He's also a man who likes his women the same exact way he likes his yogurt. It is none other than your tall, dark, and mildly handsome man, Sir Denver B. I feel like spoiling the entirety of the episode, especially since it might not even be all that long. But you know what? For now, I'm gonna start with thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you listen all the way till the end. I do intend on talking about some relationship shit and, some women shit, if I can say it like that. And considering that I'm trying out this new format for these episodes, I'd really appreciate if you actually like it or not. I wouldn't mind going back to the original style where I used to have an intro and shit. But all in all, thank you so much for listening. And like I stated in the previous episode, we were recently nominated for an award by the APVA, or Africa Podcasting and Voice Actors Association. And if you can follow the link that's in the description and vote for the Breaktime Podcast on the relationship and the comedy podcast categories, I'd really appreciate it. Like a lot. I want to win awards and shit, and then say that I'm an award-winning podcaster and shit. Builds to my ego and everything. But all in all, I've got something in the main topic that I feel like we should really talk about. And much as it might seem like it's very directed to the men, I think, the women do also stand to gain from it as well. Although, before I get to that, I first want to talk about the women for a little bit. Because ladies first, and then, sometimes these topics just come and you just can't let them go. Now, normally people like to say that women are very complicated individuals. And personally, I agree with that. Women can be very complicated. They say yes when they mean no, they say yes when they mean yes, and they say yes when they mean maybe. They also say no when they mean yes, they say no when they mean no, and they say no when they mean maybe. Like, how the fuck is any of that simple? But considering that there was a situation where I may have read a story that might have made me think that women might actually have simple desires, I figured I might as well bring it up. Now, very recently, there was an ex-CIA analyst who was indicted for allegedly spying for South Korea in exchange for, get this, luxury handbags and sushi. Like, I'm trying to think about how, this can be very easily explained. And even before I start reading the story, her name, and I kid you the hell not, her name is Sue Mi. Kid you the fuck not. How the hell do you run away from that? But anyways, let me just read the story real quick because it's actually pretty short. So it says, and I quote, former CIA analyst Sue Mi Terry has been indicted for allegedly acting as a covert agent for South Korea's intelligence service in return for luxury items and upscale dinners. The indictment, unsealed in Manhattan federal court on Tuesday, claims Terry did not register as a foreign agent with the U.S. Justice Department. South Korean intelligence officers reportedly provided her with Bottega Veneta and Louis Vuitton handbags, a Dolce & Gabbana coat, and meals at Michelin-starred restaurants. End quote. Okay, now, if there's anything that shows that women have simple desires and simple pleasures, it's this. The idea that you would betray... Actually, no. The idea that you would choose to support and be loyal to an entity, all in exchange for fine dining and Louis Vuitton bags, that seems like a very simple thing to do. This is the purest example of simple pleasures, because she's being loyal to a country for all of this. Normally, you'd expect that they'd be loyal to their country for more. This is a country, it's full of millions of people, and 99.9% of them don't know who you are. The other 0.09% that's also there do not give a fuck about who you are. And then there's 0.001 that probably know you, and they also barely give a fuck. And you're being this loyal for just a couple of Louis Vuitton bags and fine dining? Like, come on, bruh. Like, if this doesn't tell you that women have simple pleasures, I don't know what does. Except that, I don't know. I'm kind of thinking about this story and it sounds a bit BS to some degree because, like, you choosing to be loyal for just a couple of Louis Vuitton bags and fine dining, like, I feel like all of those things can just be faked around with, like, you having a secret boyfriend. Like, you can have a boyfriend who has a bunch of money and will take you out on like fine dining dates and will buy you a couple of expensive bags. And at that point, as he's busy talking to you about work, which, you know, you probably think work is boring, but he's like, nah, I want to listen to how boring work is. I find it interesting. And then you end up spilling a bunch of state secrets. And then at that point, you know, you get accused of treason and shit. But you telling me that Shorty was doing this for her country just for a bunch of Louis bags and some fine dining, that seems a little bit off, because if anyone knows the consequences of you selling state secrets and you are working in intelligence, that shit is mad. Like, not only will you be locked up, and this is like the first time I'm hearing someone who's been accused of selling state secrets being taken to court and being indicted and shit, but like, you will be tortured in ways that most of us mere mortals probably can't even fathom, and all of that shit will be done in a black site that cannot be located on a map somewhere. Like, that's the kind of shit that the CIA usually promise the moment you start selling out information to a different country. And you're telling me a babe did this for a couple of Louis bags and some sushi. This is, I don't know, this feels like it's just targeted and the wrong person got caught and they probably ended up giving out the wrong information and they didn't even know about it, or her access credentials were used or some shit. All in all, I actually feel sorry for this woman because, one, I know women aren't this simple. Y'all want way more than just this. So there's a good chance she might be getting framed here, or she just ended up in a situation she didn't even know about. Two, she probably didn't even intend on doing any of this shit. I think the way it's been phrased, it's like, oh, you decided to sell out the US government for a couple of Louis bags. Nah, I don't think she knew about this shit. She probably just got roped into it, and for the most part, like, this was probably like an awkward relationship gone bad. But then again, I could be wrong about this shit. At the end of the day, maybe it's just me that isn't as patriotic, and maybe I just haven't encountered as simple women with such simple yet expensive taste. So I will leave it at that and move it on to our main topic of this episode. Now, normally, whenever I'm doing a lot of these episodes, whenever I will discuss a certain topic, I'll always throw out a bunch of stats and I'll always say something regarding a certain demographic of people, and, you know, whether doing something will make it easier for you to get a babe or easier for you to retain a person, or what would be more likely for you to sort of end up retaining a person. But of late, I noticed that considering that this statistics is out there, the information is out there, it seems like people, more so guys, are getting deterred, or they're feeling deterred from actually approaching women. Now, I am going to play a clip that actually does show this pretty well before I can get into my thoughts on it, but it does seem like things might be getting very sad, yet they might not be as bad as we might think. But either way, let me just play the clip for you. So, without further ado,
if I'm 5'7", right, and I'm 5'8", I'm 5'9", I'm less desirable. Okay? To women in America.
To who? I know plenty of 5'7" guys that are in relationships that make less than six figures.
I actually know a few too.
So to the women I want.
Okay, perfect.
Yep.
Doesn't change anything.
It does. It changes a lot.
Why does it change anything?
Because that's what I'm saying. This is the buffer part where you will be 5'7", you'll be like, I'm not desirable to women here in America. That sounds much different than, hey, the women that I want, bruh, they don't want me.
okay, now that that's been played, I guess we can probably bring up this very glaring reality that's out there, where guys are very aware that statistically there is something that might put you at a disadvantage. Not unless if you're some form of genetic and economic outlier, so you're like 6 foot something, you're making a really good stack of bank, and you know, you're a very good looking individual, which, like I said, both genetic and economic outlier. But for the most part, it's like there's always something that makes guys seem like they aren't entirely up to it these days. And the problem is that it's like whatever stimulus we're getting in the name of information, or whatever stimulus or information we're getting from like social media, more so from YouTube videos, hell, from podcasts like mine, it kind of makes it seem as though if you're a guy and say you're less than 6 feet, you're not making as much cash, it's like you're automatically not going to be considered by most babes. And I usually know for a fact that that's not true, even though I spit out the facts, but it's usually because whenever I'm spitting out these facts or I'm giving the statistical knowledge, it's usually based off of a case of probability and me trying to hammer a point home on something that might be affecting us as a people that we'd probably need to take note of. So I guess to a certain degree, there's a lot of generalization that I put in there. But the reality of it is, it's never usually always according to the statistics. And oddly enough, like, statistics can be very, very misleading. And like, that's something that I think more and more people need to start taking into account, especially statistics that lines with something that they believe as opposed to something that they don't believe, because there's a lot of guys right now that believe that, not unless if they're making a boatload of money and they look a certain way, that they won't be attractive to women, yet they might actually be doing pretty well for themselves and they might actually seem attractive to even some women, but they're never really going to think that way. Because according to statistics, A, B, C, and D, and because he does not fulfill the criteria of A, B, C, or D, or A, B, and C, then automatically they're not going to be considered. And it's like, no, I have to start working, I have to start ensuring that I get to this and this level, or I need to make sure that I make more money. And the sad part of it is, it's like this never-ending cycle of you constantly trying to get to that point where you feel like you're desirable to a woman. Now, the reality of it is, there are some cases where, you definitely do have to put in that work. Like, if you are not in the best mental state or emotional state or psychological state or financial state, then of course there is a point at which where you definitely do need to put in that work. Not just for the babe, but also for yourself as a guy. But if you consider yourself unworthy of being with women or being attractive to women or attractable to women based off the fact that you're not at a certain level, then there's a very good chance that you may actually end up being a slave to the desires of an imaginary person or an imaginary ideal that doesn't necessarily exist. And it's something that plagues guys a lot. It's something that I think also plagues women to a certain degree. But I usually tend to see this a lot with guys because we are expected to be the ones that will reach out and chase. So when we see particular studies or we hear people say things that seem factually correct based off of what we see out here, then it is very easy for us to suddenly come to this conclusion that, I don't think I'd be the best option for women, or I don't think I'd be able to attract women. Yet you may not even know it, but there could even be a babe that's crushing on you as we speak. But because there's certain statistics that don't seem to put you in this genetically or economically or, statistically advantageous position, you suddenly feel like you're not really it. Yet when you actually look at some of these details, it's something that is more of a generalization and does not reflect the actual reality of people, just like the guys in the video said. So like, take for example the Tinder study, where people talk about how 78% of women will probably only swipe right on like the 2% of guys that are above 6 feet and look a certain way and they have this certain demeanor about them. And you might be like, oh well, it's only 20% of guys that are actually getting dates on Tinder, blah blah. But you kind of forget the fact that these are studies that were done by Tinder on Tinder. Like, kind of think about it for a second. This is Tinder we're talking about. It's the online dating site, and it's primarily based off of the fact that someone has to find you attractive on the photo first, which of course can be manipulated and can be edited and can be taken by a really good photographer to be attractive. And from there, that's when they'll sort of make their decisions. Like, if you ever actually sit next to women whenever they're busy swiping through Tinder, like, they're taking like half a second per swipe. So you can't entirely base the entirety of the dating market and the reality of dating out here to what people are doing on Tinder when it just comes to half-second swiping. So of course, yes, that statistic does work for Tinder, and that's based off of Tinder's data, but it's not reflective of what actually happens out here in the streets. Then you look at the other bit of talk that people will talk about, where it's like, you must have the 3 6s, or is it the 6 6s? You know, that thing usually tends to flip around here and there, where it's like you have to be a 6-foot guy with a 6-figure job or making 6 figures and have a 6-pack, and I want to have 6 cars, or which are making 600 horsepower or some shit. I don't know. Like, I know of the 6 feet, 6-figure, 6-pack type thing that, you know, like people usually say women look for nowadays. And the truth of it is, when you look at the dating market out here and you look at the people that are in relationships and you try to count the number of guys that have 6-packs, like, I'd actually want to ask anyone who's in Nairobi to just check on guys who are in relationships who have 6-packs. I bet they're countable. I actually bet that you can count them. You try and you look for the guys that have 6-packs and aren't in relationships, and they're even more. Then you look at the statistics that you can find on the Kenya Bureau of Statistics on the number of people that are making 6 figures, the number of people who have savings of 6 figures, or at least the percentage of Kenyans that have a 6-figure savings, and that number is tiny. You know, you look at the number of guys that are 6 feet tall, like, yes, it's definitely quite the number, but if you remove married individuals, okay, actually, no, you don't remove married individuals, because some of them are also still in the streets like single guys, but you realize that the numbers of all of these things are so freakishly small, and you actually think that women are all going to be chasing the same thing. It's a little bit misleading when you kind of think about it. Also, if you check on the talking points of the 3 6s, if you look at the statistics of Tinder, like, for the most part, those are pieces of information that actually are more relevant, or at least more indicative of the society in the West, not here in Nairobi, not in most parts of Africa. Like, that is mostly stats from the West. So it's probably even worse to try and compare it to you that's here in a different part of the world, or even Asia or the Middle East or some shit. But guess what? You know, there's tons of guys that look at stuff like this and they're like, nah, you know, I need to make more money, because at least if I'm making 6 figures, I can override the whole 6-pack and like 6 feet tall type thing. And, you know, it's guys that are just trying to work themselves, and they feel like they are financially incapable of dating, even though they might actually be capable of dating. Even when you look at it financially, it's just that they haven't really been told that they are capable of doing it. And, you know, they kind of look at it and almost thinking to themselves, well, you know, we really have to put in this work. But at the same time, they're like, you know what, I'm not alone. I'm with a bunch of guys, because there's a Pew Research study that stated that 63% of men are no longer approaching women. So even though I don't approach women and, you know, I stick in my cocoon and I don't try and put myself out there, like, I'm not alone, and hopefully things will change. You know, these women will definitely have to start approaching us or some shit. Or, you know, once I make money, I won't have to do the approaching. Yeah, you find a guy that's just sitting there busy thinking that, yet it's not even the truth. That Pew Research study was based off of stats in the US. Like, it is not an indication of the situation here in Nairobi or in most places in Africa. So all of that is wrong. Like, you go out here and you go to the club on a typical Friday or Saturday or Sunday evening, and there's guys that are trying to hit on babes. You walk out here in the streets, there's people that are going out on dates and they're not 6 feet tall. Hell, the number of people that have 6-packs are so few that at this rate, it's better for a guy to just have a flat stomach. That puts them in like this very, very small percentile, as opposed to the number of guys that have a bulging belly. So you realize that so many of these things seem so astronomically far away, because they mostly are for a lot of guys, and at no point are they being told that this is probably more of an ideal scenario, but it's not the reality. Like, women have their ideals and they definitely have their checklists on guys, but you find that most of that shit is superficial. Like, there's not that many women that are like, if the guy is in 6 feet tall making 6 figures and has a six-pack, I won't date them. The number of women that will say that shit and are still single is huge, but the number of women that actually say that is so tiny that I'd argue the number of women that are willing to date a married man is much larger than the number of women that say that. And I'd probably be right about it. So for the most part, I'd say that a lot of what guys think is wanted by women in the dating market might probably not entirely be it. I tend to think that women also have fairly realistic demands, at least to some degree. Which brings me to my conclusion to all of this. The data has to have a full stop. Like, honestly, the data has to have a full stop somewhere. People need to understand that not only does data not entirely capture an entire real-world environment, but it also has variations to it, and it also has room for error, and we need to account for that because reality is not just data and statistics. The numbers, the pie charts, the probabilities, yes, they're there, and yes, they're quite possible in a lot of cases, but it does not indicate the reality for every single person. I know a guy who's 5 feet tall, and by 5 feet I mean 5 foot flat. This guy has great social skills, the kind that would pull babes, and this guy is in a great relationship and he's been in that relationship for a while. I know guys who are under 6 feet who've been dating, who aren't millionaires, who've managed to get married and have dated people for years on end. And they seem to be pretty good so far. Neither one of those two people has a six-pack and they're still doing pretty well for themselves. And I know they may exist as outliers, but the point I'm trying to make here is, with all of the guys that are busy thinking that they can't get a babe, not unless if they're of a certain height, or at the very least, they make a certain amount of money, I feel like this is your opportunity as a guy for you to reach out there and go and talk to women. Stop thinking about the stats. Just go reach out to the babe, talk to them, and if it works out, it works out, and if it doesn't work out, it's perfectly fine. Because guess what? Over 80% of women want to be approached by a guy. And yes, I know I'm using the stat here, but last I checked, women prefer being approached by the guy. And trust me, there's a lot of women out here that would be very happy dating a guy regardless of whether they have a six-pack or not, regardless of whether they're making a mill or not, just as long as they treat them well, they hold their own, and they are very confident individuals. Or I could be wrong about this entire thing and women do want fine dining, Louis Vuitton bags, and a bunch of sushi here and there. Either way, I want your thoughts on it. The DMs are open. On IG, it is at the Breaktime_podcast. On Facebook, it is at the Breaktime Podcast. And on X, it is at Bagaka the D. There's also the feedback link at the top of the description if you want to use that. Thank you so much for listening all the way till the end. And I would still appreciate that vote from you. But all in all, I will catch you guys on the next break.
But what I believe is that if you put a pastor and a prostitute in one room, one is likely to convert the other.